So, hello and welcome back to the first episode of Tuesday Talks of the new year. And I'm delighted to welcome on Laura Howard, someone that I got to know through studying at St Mary's University, an award-winning journalist, among many other things. First of all, how are you doing, Laura?
Yeah, good, thank you. Not bad at all. I recently moved back to London, so just kind of getting resettled in. But yeah, I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, because you're back in London now and you told me that you sort of started up a new job. So, what does that entail exactly?
Yeah, so I've just started at Sportsbeat as a multimedia content producer is the name of the role. And it's kind of a bit of everything. I liked it because it feels like a really good starter role to kind of get me doing kind of a range of stuff. They're like a syndication company and they basically produce content for a range of different like governing bodies, but also newspapers. So it could be like writing for the women's football pullout in the Mirror, or it could be doing socials for like the FA or the FA Women's National League. They do kind of everything for. So yeah, it's really varied. And I don't know the full extent of it at all yet after only a week, but it looks really exciting and I'm enjoying it so far.
Yeah, nice, nice. And is that in the same building we done the NCTJ stuff in?
Yeah, it is. So it's weird because it's like I'm now on the bottom floor, having been on the fourth floor. So I've like really upgraded there. But yeah, it's in the News Associates building in Twickenham.
Yeah, have you seen a couple of familiar faces there? Have you seen Tom or Graham?
Yeah, Tom and Gray sit in the same office as me, which is bizarre. And I also saw our course leader, Dara, yesterday. He was in for a meeting. So a lot of familiar faces around, definitely.
I can just imagine like if you're doing match report or something, just like Tom lingering around, like telling you what to
Yeah.
do.
Yeah. Yeah, great. I've had a couple of chats with Graham. I've not actually spoken to Tom, but yeah, I can hear him a lot, and it like, definitely takes me back to like sports journalism. I'm expecting like I'm obviously not in on Friday this week, but I was expecting like to walk into a sports quiz or something.
Exactly, like testing you on your knowledge of whatever happened in like rugby or tennis, like the most random sporting fact or something. But
Yeah, exactly.
yeah, no, I bet that's good for you to kind of be back in that environment because I mean, for us, obviously, we met at St Mary's round about what October 2023 time, which is what 13, 14 months ago now, which is crazy to think, isn't it, that that much time has passed and like going into St Mary's, kind of what was your expectations of it? Because I know beforehand you'd done like a degree in history and politics, so kind of transitioning from that style of things to then sports journalism. How did you find it?
Yeah, it was. I don't think it was exactly what I expected. It was. I think I'd gone from like history and politics, like you say, which is quite like low contact hours. I think I had 8 hours contact hours a week, which was like very much structuring my own time. I did a lot of sports at undergrad, kind of like I was in the hockey team and did all that. So my like week was basically structured around that, and I spent most of my time reading in the library, and it was very very different to that. Sports journalism was like a lot more practical, a lot more time spent probably listening and learning. But also there weren't like big lectures like I'd experienced at undergrad. It was very much like seminars, but not seminars in the way that I'd kind of also experienced. So it was just very different. It felt more like school, I'd say, than like my undergrad. Not necessarily a bad thing, but that was kind of the format more. And I don't think I was expecting that just because my experience of university was different to that. But yeah, I enjoyed the like practical elements of it. I think getting to learn things like Adobe Premiere Pro, which I'd never done before, and that aspect of it was really good because it kind of gives you that insight. And also like having the Sports Gazette, which we obviously both wrote for, during that time, it's kind of like a paper that we, I guess, ran like a website about sport that we ran as a cohort. That was really good to kind of just experiment, write what we wanted to write, and have that autonomy, I guess. So yeah, I think it was interesting. I don't think it was exactly what I was like imagining when I joined up for it, and I think there were elements that I'd probably have hoped to learn that I didn't, but I also think that's really hard and maybe I had high expectations because it's just like actually how would you achieve those things? But I think the NCTJ was really helpful in just like honing kind of a really good tight writing style and I definitely benefited from that. And again, the Adobe Premiere Pro stuff was really interesting as well.
Is sports media like an area that you've always wanted to get into? Because like considering you didn't really do it at undergrad, you've done like I think was it a bit of freelance writing and this shit. You played hockey as well, so you've had like a sporting background. But going into like sports journalism and sports media, is that something that you've kind of had your eye on for a while before joining St. Mary's, or was it a thing that kind of just happened in the moment?
Yeah, I don't think I did at all, to be honest. I think it was probably only my final year of university that I was like, oh, this is what I wanted to do. At Warwick, and my undergrad, I'd been involved in the student newspaper, and I think the most natural section for me to write in was the sports section because I had experience of like on-campus sport, like university sport, so I could do a bit of that. And then I also just like love watching sport. I've always like had an interest in sport. I love watching football since I was like 4 or 5. So I think it's kind of always been there as like a hobby, but I don't think I'd necessarily say it became like a reality as a job. And I think doing that like student newspaper stuff was probably what kind of pushed me down that route. 'Cause it's like actually this is something I really enjoy. But I think, and I think this is kind of evident in your writing as well, but I think we both enjoy the kind of intersection between maybe like more social issues and politics. And there's still a joy in writing about pure sport. I love a match report and just doing do enjoy that, but I think there's also like I like bringing the stuff that I learned from history and politics into my writing as a sports journalist. I think that's always been the direction I've wanted to approach it from. But I mean, through school, I think part way through school, I kind of wanted to be a political journalist. I think it was like during Brexit and all that, I got really into kind of current affairs. And started following loads of journalists, and I thought maybe that's what I'd go down. But I never sports journalism and other points. It's just kind of like the classic like lawyer. I don't know anything that like people that study history, the classic job routes that I was kind of thinking about. But I never really considered sports journalism. I wouldn't say.
And you said like you're into Brexit there and like the sort of journalism side of things. And sort of when I was looking into what you were doing at university, you were also teaching and being part of debating societies. So I imagine that links quite into politics, doesn't it? So how did you get into that and what does that exactly entail?
Yeah, I was so at school I did debating, which was I really enjoyed. I kind of got into it that way, and we got taught how to do it. And then when I went to university, I you were able to work for a thing called Debate Mate, which kind of goes into schools with I think the like criteria is higher than average levels of pupils on free school meals, and you go and teach the pupils there how to debate, and it's meant to be kind of a social mobility program. Um, which yeah, it was really rewarding. It was a bit of a weird experience for me because it was during COVID, and normally you get to go in and teach in person, but I was just doing it through Zoom, which meant that you're kind of like trying to teach a class of 20 plus kids remotely, which is just never the most easy thing. But yeah, I really enjoyed that, and then I did some tutoring as well. I mean, that was mainly to just like earn a bit of money. But yeah, I did enjoy it. It was like very different to what I'd probably like. I've never considered a career in teaching. I think I'd be terrible if that was like my job, but I did actually really enjoy those things. And I think debating's definitely helped me in journalism because it's kind of that like how to set out an argument and build up an argument and make those links and just articulate myself. So yeah, those skills are like really important. And I was very, I guess, privileged to be able to have that opportunity at a young age and then take that and be able to help other people with that.
And would you say that like educating is a primary factor in what you do now as well as back then? Because you said about, speaking on social issues and really kind of trying to get your message across and what other people are telling you as well. So that kind of educating part, I really feel like that goes from what you were talking about there into debating as well as journalism as well.
Yeah, I've never thought of it like that, but I guess it is because it's kind of that like wanting to raise awareness of different perspectives, and I think that's what drew me as well to sports journalism because you're accessing a different audience. Like if you stay in political journalism, which I think super interesting, and like that's a lot of the journalism that I consume, but you're probably already at targeting an audience that are engaged in those issues. So I would read political like journalism because that's what I'm interested in. But if you're writing in sports journalism, you're accessing there will be obviously some overlap, but you're also speaking to people that maybe would only view themselves as interested in sport, but because their hero or someone that they're interested in their football team or whatever team they do support is talking about these issues, that might engage them in a different way and you can connect with people in a different way. So I guess yeah, it definitely feels like a factor in why I want to go into it to be able to speak to different people about those issues and maybe connect with different people in that way. And yeah, that's I'd never considered myself as doing that, but yeah, I think that's a good point actually.
And you say about the journalists that you follow as well. What kind of journalists do you follow at the moment? Is it more sport than political? How is it kind of divided? Say, for instance, like your social media following and what comes up on your timeline.
Yeah, I think it's pretty divided between the two. I'd say a lot, like throughout university, throughout our masters, I tried to follow as many sports journalists as I could because it's just kind of like trying to consume as many different things to try and learn from them and their style, which is something we definitely encouraged to do. So I feel like it's probably weighted towards that at the moment, but I definitely went through a period. I think if you look at my following, there's a lot of like basically anyone that covers women's football, I will probably follow. So like Susie Racks, Tom Garry's, Catherine Batt, Emma Sanders, all those kind of the women's football pack, I think it's called. Megan Feringa at the Athletic, like all those people I'll follow. So that's dominates quite a lot of my feed. And then probably yeah, I follow like Chris Mason, who's the political editor at the BBC, and Beth Rigby from Sky, who are like political journalists. So that's quite a lot as well. Lewis Goodall, who's on the Newsagent podcast. So there is definitely a balance, and I enjoy reading like different things. I think podcasts for me like is a big thing for politics. So I listen to a lot of the like Today in Focus, The Guardian, Guardian Politics Weekly, news agents, or even then the sports agents, which do a lot of political sports stuff. So yeah, I enjoy that as just as much as kind of consuming sports journalism and hopefully bring some of those issues into my sports writing as well.
Because I feel like for us being like sports journalists and in the kind of media sphere, you kind of have that thing where you absorb a lot of media and then it kind of molds the way that you view things and how you perceive yourself as well, because it tends to be that the stuff that you listen to, you kind of try to replicate in some way, not exactly copy, but take inspiration from it. So from what you've listened to, is there like one podcast or one writer in particular that you've taken the most inspiration from?
Yeah, I think there probably is. I think one that stands out. I started my own podcast recently, and I need to pick it up again because life's kind of got in the way, and I want us to get that momentum back. But one that I think I take different inspirations from different like for different things. So in my writing, I often look at George Sims's writing. He writes for the I paper. Um, and I just love the way he writes. I think it's super engaging, and I don't think I can replicate it, but I just enjoy the way he kind of looks at topics and kind of gets a really human and it's so like a detailed perspective on the person that I think it's just super engaging. And I don't think I can write like that, but I just enjoy like consuming his writing. But then I think in terms of things that I've tried to kind of take inspiration from, I'd say Miriam Walker Khan at Sky did a podcast called Real Talk, which was I really enjoyed. It's kind of just addressing various like issues in sport that are like taboo topics. So that series is brilliant, and I really enjoyed that. And so for my podcast, I kind of listened to that a lot. I think it's not got that many episodes, but it was on my like Spotify Rap Most podcast because I've like re-listened to them to like get used to the format. And I tried to use some of that because she had someone who had the like lived experience of these issues, and then she also had an expert to talk about it. And I wanted to do this podcast on women's football history, and I wanted to include some like academia in there because I think we don't have an awful lot of that in sports. So I kind of listened to that format and tried to take elements of it. Not all of that format obviously works for what I wanted to do because it's not exactly the same. But I think that's probably who I'd say I've taken the most inspiration like directly from.
Yeah, Miriam Walker Khan is a potential guest for the podcast in the next few weeks. And her and George Sims they won the SJA Awards, didn't they? The same award ceremony as you. So being around that atmosphere and being on like the stage as well with the likes of Darren Lewis, next to you in that picture, what was that like being at the awards and what did you write to enter that competition?
Yeah, that was a pretty incredible experience. It's like very imposter syndrome when you're there. But it was like very much a blur for me because I was freelancing as a like, before I even knew that I'd won it. agreed to be on social media for the SJAs that night. So like I kind of ran up to the stage, got my trophy, had that photo, and then had to like run back to my seat and tweet about it. And I was like live tweeting the whole evening. So I didn't really get to take it in the same way you might normally. But yeah, it was incredible. And then like speaking to people like George Sims afterwards was yeah really cool. He's super nice, so that was just like nice. And then you're kind of there with I think Adam Crafton won like the overall Sports Journalist of the Year award, and getting to speak to him and talk to people like that was yeah incredible afterwards. For what I submitted, they were all quite focused on social issues as well. So I did one piece about like grassroots disability hockey with Flyers hockey that I'd written in the hockey paper. I did a piece with the captain of the England women's blind football team. They'd had their basically inaugural world championship, so that was about her story. And then I did a book review about Sharon Davis's book about basically like anti-trans book about it's called Unfair Play, and I didn't enjoy it, so I kind of did a review taking down the various parts of her argument and arguing against them. Which yeah, it kind of went quite big in the end on social media. So I think that probably stood out as well because I was able to kind of say like this got a lot of views basically.
I was going to say about that story because the story that you told at St. Mary's, I don't know how much you can go into detail about it, but yeah, it's a good one.
Yeah, she replied to me on Twitter, which because it got quite big, and obviously a lot of the transphobes on Twitter like tagging various accounts. So yeah, she obviously picked it up somehow and replied to me and basically said like you'll never make it as a journalist. And she cited these. It made me laugh because she cited these two like surveys that she'd run on Twitter. You know, you can do the polls, but one she'd ran, which is obviously weighted, and then another one was like I think Athletics Weekly, which was also probably weighted. And she was basically having a go at me, saying I wasn't being scientific and I'd never make it as a journalist, whilst quoting two clearly terribly scientific polls, like not scientific in any way, and none of what she wrote in that book was particularly like well thoroughly scientifically checked or anything. So yeah, it was quite ironic. And I happened to bump into her as well at an awards ceremony, like completely different that I was just kind of attending. And I had to, she didn't know where she was going, but she wouldn't look at me. She just kind of kept her head quite aloft and made her assistant do all the talking. And I was very tempted to send her in the wrong direction, but I did show her the way to go.
Yeah, just show her the picture of the award and say, yeah, you told me that
Yeah.
I was going to make it, and look what I'm
I
holding
know,
right
I was
now.
very tempted, like on the year anniversary, to be like, to quote tweet her and just say, like, oh, these are the things that I have achieved this year. Um, and maybe I have made it as a journalist, but yeah, I
Yeah, no,
didn't in the end.
I certainly think you have, Laura, and looking forward to your career now and like what you're doing at the moment. You said about Sportsbeat and also the other websites that you're contributing to. So She's a Border, I know, is getting a lot of traction at the moment. They were at the Football Content Awards when I was there, and I got chat to a couple of the contributors there that tell me about what they're doing and everything. So what's it like working on that website?
Yeah, that's been really cool. It's been a completely new experience for me. I think it's interesting because it's been quite a social media oriented site. It very much like a big following on Instagram, which is huge, like over 200,000 followers, and what they do there is amazing. And they recently, in September, I think it was September, that was launched. They launched a new website, which is obviously where the written content that I do goes, and that's been a completely different strand that they've kind of launched. And yeah, Chloe Morgan, who's kind of heads it up, and I've been contributing to that, which has been really interesting because I think it's something that they haven't done before, and it's not necessarily like at the moment a huge part of their necessarily business model. Because I think that's quite social media oriented, but it's been really fun to grow that, and I think it's a really nice platform to be able to tell those different stories that we've kind of spoken about. I've been able to write about Saf Middleton Patel and her experiences with autism, and Riley Foster, who's an Everton goalkeeper, was involved in a car crash. So I've been able to speak to her, and hopefully there's a couple of more pieces coming up soon about also like different stories that aren't necessarily well represented. And I think yeah, that's part of a new series that they kind of pushing on their social media as well. So it's really nice to kind of have that overlap and have the like incredible social media content support the website, which is something that I've kind of not had before. So yeah, that's been really exciting.
Because whenever I spoke to you, like a lot of the time you write about stuff that isn't represented as much as it should be. And I'd say that's one of like your main kind of thoughts as a writer, isn't it, as to what you want to get into and voices that you want to be heard kind of within your writing. And you talk about, you know, in hockey as well, when you discuss certain stories. And with both of them, like going forward, what is a main ambition of yours to kind of do that you haven't done yet in terms of telling a certain story or a certain part of sport?
I think, wow, it's a tough question. I think maybe like I'd like to keep telling those stories and growing the audience which I tell them to. So I guess in my current role, like looking ahead, just trying to, I think something that I'd like to do is push disability sport in whatever avenues, because I think there's so many stories to be told there, and there's so much like incredible achievements that aren't celebrated. Like I was at the FA Disability Cup day at St George's Park, and I think it's on TNT potentially. But that's the only coverage they get all year. And you've got you won't like this, but West Bromwich Albion are like winning so much in power chair football.
West Brom
Like,
are fine with me actually. Like
okay, that's all
in
right. That's
terms of
all
my
right.
family,
Okay.
it's like I've got uncles and cousins that support. No one supports Villa or Wolves. Like we don't worry about
Okay.
that. But West Brom's passable.
West Brom's okay. All right. So yeah, West Brom are doing like incredibly in power chair football. They win like Champions League, and so are Aspire. Like the English power chair football stuff is incredible. But you don't hear about it. So it's just they've also won like I think European title and got to the World Cup final. And it's just why aren't we hearing these stories more? Because when England men do that, or even the women do that, it's really well celebrated. And just getting those stories out there more. I think I'd love to be able to do that um, more. I think I've tried to write about it so far, but getting that out to a bigger audience is definitely probably an ambition.
Mm. And you say there about the FA Disability Cup, and I'll definitely be looking that up afterwards, actually, because I've seen like on TNT Sports when it's broadcast, but never actually looked into it properly. So yeah, that's something that I'd look into. And in terms of like other sporting events, is there one that kind of stands out to you that you want to attend that you haven't attended yet?
I'd love to go to a Women's Champions League final. I think like going abroad for any sport is always like a big thing. It feels like fun, more than domestic games in some ways. And so yeah, to attend that event would be a bonus if Arsenal could get there, but that might be a bit of a way off. So yeah, to attend that would be really cool, and especially like in the press box. And I think maybe anyone would say the Olympics, but that would be incredible as a journalist to do that.
I was going to say it must be a bonus for you if Arsenal reach that final because
Yeah.
in terms of their season so far in the WSL, how would you evaluate it in the overall WSL landscape at the moment?
I think like if you were looking at it without the context of what's happened at Arsenal this season, you'd probably say they're below par. They should be like competing for the league, definitely with the squad they have and the building that they've had over the past few years. And they're not, well, I mean, they technically still could, but they're a bit too far behind Chelsea, I'd say, especially with the low number of games in that league. But I guess it's hard because had we had the start, like we had sacking of Jonas. Well, he left, but Jonas Eidevall's obviously left mid-season, and all that context. You look at Renee Schlegers's campaign, and you think that looks like a success, and it has been a success so far. So in that context, we're doing okay, but I think you'd have hoped that Jonas Eidevall would have had a better start, and we'd have been in a better position overall. And I think it's quite disappointing that it feels like we're maybe having to go through that rebuilding process again. And it felt like this maybe should have been the season. You've got Sonia Bonpastor coming in to Chelsea as a new manager. City had a good chance, but now they've been hit by injuries, and it really looked like there could have been an opportunity with the kind of reigning champions in flux, although they've done incredibly well this season. But yeah, we haven't managed to take that opportunity, which is frustrating. But overall, we're through to Champions League knockouts, and we'll see how it goes in the WSL.
Because recently I done a video on Blues Focus, which touched on the women's team and focusing on their season so far, and they're top of the women's championship at the moment. So really hoping that they get back to the WSL because it's been, yeah, quite a few years since they've been out of it, and the way they got relegated as well. I know it was pretty close, but now there's a lot more reinvestment into the women's team. So I'm really hoping they get back to the WSL and can play against the big teams like your Arsenals, your Man Cities, and your Chelseas because they're a team that had a lot of history like in women's football, but then had to let go of a lot of their big players because of kind of the financial mismanagement of it. So what do you know about Birmingham women's team? Because I'm trying to like kind of educate myself on it because I'm definitely going to go to a game soon.
Yeah, they're doing super well this season, which is really exciting. I think they definitely have, like you said, like had a big history. My my memory is of taking my girlfriend to her first Arsenal game away at Birmingham City at St Andrews, and we were like, because there weren't it was like before the Euros, so it was like before when the seats were quite not filled, and we were basically eye level with the pitch, which doesn't actually make for that good viewing, even though it feels like it would be really good to be close. And then Arsenal just fell to this like really disappointing 2-0 loss to Birmingham City. I think it's probably yeah, it was a pretty depressing day for me, but that's my Birmingham City women's memories. But yeah, no, they look really exciting. They've got a really good team this year, and hopefully can I'd like to see them get back up. I think from any of those teams pushing between them and maybe Durham, because Durham are like in the championship or an independent women's team, which is always nice. But yeah, no, I think that's a really exciting story to follow this season because I think the championship is it's like similar to the men's. It's just such a competitive league in the women's game as well, and it will be really hard to get out of. But I think maybe Bristol City are probably the biggest competition by the looks of it at the moment, who obviously would be a bit of a yo-yo if they came back up. But yeah, I'm rooting for Birmingham as well.
Because there's been a big overhaul like in the playing staff as well as the coaching staff as well because Amy Rennicks has come in like a young coach from Brighton and then Hope Powell as well coming in a technical director side of things. And I know she's got a big history in the women's game, isn't she?
Yeah, huge history, and Amy Merrick's looks really good as a coach. So definitely really exciting to keep an eye on that. And Hope Powell, yeah, like England legend, obviously former England coach, and one of the like real pioneers of that England women's team. She was playing around the time of like the first women's Euros, and in those squads. So yeah, I think it's such a good figure to have in and around your club in terms of experience, and also just like again having that understanding, both playing, both managerial. So having her in, I guess, like a higher management role rather than like the kind of coaching role, is definitely huge. And yeah, Amy Merricks has looked so good. So it's a really exciting setup, and I think there's also a really nice balance at Birmingham of kind of like a youth and experienced players. Like you've got Louise Quinn at the back, which is like incredible experience. She's a WSL winner, but then you've also got a lot of exciting youth players coming through, which always makes for a nice balance to a squad, I feel.
And looking at the bigger picture as well, obviously we've got the Women's Euros this year, England looking to retain their trophy. So, what are your thoughts going into that tournament? Because, I mean, I don't know what the feelings like compared to kind of the World Cup. Obviously, for that, it was late heartbreak, wasn't it, against Spain, and then now this tournament. So, how would you say the attitude kind of is now compared to then?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think in terms of like a footballing perspective, I think for me, like it doesn't feel quite as exciting because I think at this stage, like January running into the World Cup, it really felt like England can go and win this. But then they had those blips against Australia. They lost in a friendly, and there was that kind of nervy period. And then they did incredibly well to get to the final. But I don't think they ever like hit their stride till maybe late knockout rounds in the World Cup, which is worrying for the Euros. And I don't think England have necessarily looked as good because they're going through this kind of like rebuild phase. So I guess the excitement of like, oh my God, this England team looks really good has faded a little bit. And I think there's a lot of problems that do need to be addressed. But then I don't think you can truly judge an international team until the tournament starts. I think Serena Wiegman's obviously an incredible manager, and we definitely have to be up there among the favourites. So, yeah, I'm obviously super excited for it. I think performance-wise, it's not looked as like smooth sailing as it perhaps has in the past, but that's to be expected. Like we probably played better teams than we did in the run-up to the 2022 Euros. But yeah, some big injuries. Hemp and Greenwood both like now doubts, and the fact that we're in the group of death does feel concerning, given we've like other than 2022 Euros, we've had quite slow starts to the tournaments, particularly at the most recent one. So you when you're facing teams like France and I think it's the Netherlands, is it? In the other teams in the group, obviously Wales as well, that's going to be a really tough group to emerge from and definitely requires like a good start, which hasn't necessarily been characteristic of this England squad.
Are you hoping to attend a game, maybe in a fan capacity, maybe in a media accreditation side of things?
I was, but I'm kind of like the living costs in Switzerland really, really puts me off. Like it's so expensive. My friend did a year abroad there, and she was kind of just talking about like a can of Coke being about 9 quid, and I was just like, I don't know if I can afford that. But I'll definitely take it in a in media capacity, but I'd have to be paid. I don't think as much as I'd love to go and watch it because it's close, I don't think I could justify that at the moment. At this point in my career, spending that amount of money without being paid. But yeah, I'd love to. I think definitely a future Euros I'll be getting out to if it's in a country with slightly lower living costs.
Yeah, I'd love to go to like a tournament as well because as much as it's good at home and like everybody around you supporting the same team, being there like in the stadium, I imagine that's going to be a great atmosphere because if anything's to go by from the last, tournament, say for instance, like the World Cup in Australia, where it's a really good atmosphere there, as well as the Women's Euros in Wembley. Like, just remember watching that semi-final and final even from home, thinking, wow, I just would love to be in that stadium. But yeah, going forward into the Switzerland tournament, what stadiums actually are there in Switzerland? Because I'm not too sure like what the capacity is for them.
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about this because they are quite low. Like as a selection for a tournament, they've selected a nation that aren't having the biggest stadiums, and it feels like maybe a bit of a downgrade from England because obviously you've got selling out Wembley. I don't think there's an equivalent in Switzerland, or certainly not the stadiums they've picked. So, yeah, I think there will be a lot smaller attendances, but I guess smaller country. So it will be interesting to see how that goes down. Whether I'm sure they'll be able to fill them, but whether there is excess demand and kind of how people are getting tickets and stuff like that. Because I think it's maybe a case of the allocation of stadiums is potentially the demand has outgrown them. So yeah, I think it's an ongoing kind of discussion in women's football of how do you make that step up? And I think at a major tournament, you want to be more ambitious than they perhaps have been in this case.
And finally, like with a big summer of sport coming up and a big year, I imagine for you, sort of like starting in a new job and stuff, what are your expectations of 2025? Because at the start of New Year, everyone likes to say, I'm going to do this for this year, make resolutions or whatever. So where's your head at the moment with your 2025?
Yeah, I think for me it's like quite personal ones in terms of the sense that it's like 2024 was amazing like professionally. I did so much and achieved so much that I don't know if I'll be able to replicate that but obviously that's the aim, that's the overall goal, just keep on the same trajectory. But I think like personally it's that like I've been doing freelancing since September and that's been great, but I think there's part of me that misses the kind of schedule of having a 9 to 5 or having like key things. So it's just kind of like getting used to a job and enjoying having the demarcation between like work time and actually learning how to relax. Because I think for most of my degree, undergrad and postgrad, I probably haven't relaxed at all because there's always that like nagging feeling that you should be doing some work because you can't like quite switch off in the same way when you have working hours. So making the most of that, getting into a better routine and yeah, I think that's my like main goals at the start of this year is just like looking after myself a bit better than I perhaps have.
I absolutely know that feeling. Just like during the sort of undergraduate degree and the master's degree, and trying just like sitting there thinking, oh, I should be doing something. And that might link into my very final question that I like to ask everybody at the end of every episode of what bit of advice would you give to someone listening to this, whether it be in a sports media capacity or just like kind of any person watching as to what advice you have for your career and future and what you'd like to tell other people?
Yeah, I think this kind of goes against what I've just said, but like take every opportunity because I think that it's an attitude that I've always had, where like if there's an opportunity there, take it, or if there's an awards to enter them. It doesn't matter whether you think, like, I really, really, really did not expect to win the SJA Awards at all. But I entered it and it ended up happening. So yeah, I think just keep like trying to get those opportunities where you can and build up that experience, even if, and I think part of that though is being like, it's like this the catch-22 of also knowing when to say no, because you need to be able to give like 100%. So don't be afraid to say yes and opt into things actively, but also don't be afraid to say no, because I think it was like a lesson that I really had to learn as well. I picked up some work on the paddle paper and then just realized that I didn't have the capacity, and it was actually bringing down the quality of everything. So it's kind of say take all the opportunities you can, but don't make yourself feel guilty if you're at your capacity on that. So yeah, make sure you leave time for yourself as well as taking those opportunities.
Brilliant. Thanks so much for your time, Laura. And I'm very much looking forward to see what you get up to in 2025. I'm sure it's going to be great.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and likewise.